My name is Paul and I want to tell you a story that turned my life upside down. This is a story about how technology can reveal the darkest secrets, even when you don't suspect a thing. I lived with Evelina for 7 years. We met in college in Chicago, got married 3 years after graduation. I worked as a mechanic at an auto repair shop. She was a manager at a small advertising agency. It seemed like we had everything figured out. A typical American suburban family. But the real shock was waiting for me later. Everything started 3 months ago when Evelina introduced me to her new friend named Rachel. They met at the gym and Rachel quickly became a frequent guest in our home. An attractive blonde in her 30s, she had recently moved to our city after a divorce. Rachel often complained about various problems in her new house. Sometimes the faucet leaked, sometimes the electricity acted up, sometimes something else. I, as usual, offered to help. After all, what man would refuse to help a woman in distress, especially his wife's friend? The first few times I actually went to Rachel's and helped with minor repairs. Evelina always knew about these visits and even thanked me for helping her friend. Everything seemed absolutely normal. But the real shock was waiting for me later. 2 weeks ago Rachel called again. She said she had problems with the plumbing in the bathroom, and could I come over on Saturday morning? I agreed as always. Evelina was at work, she had an important presentation, so she was working weekends too. I arrived at Rachel's around 10 in the morning. She greeted me in a robe, said she had just woken up. She led me to the bathroom and there was indeed a small leak under the sink. I started taking apart the connections. She stood nearby watching. Suddenly Rachel put her hand on my shoulder and said, "Paul, you're so reliable. Not like my ex-husband." I felt uncomfortable but thought she was just grateful for the help. But the real shock was waiting for me later. When I finished the repair, Rachel offered coffee. We sat in the kitchen and she started telling me about her life, about loneliness after the divorce. Then she suddenly stood up, came over to me and kissed me. I pulled away and said, "Rachel, this is wrong. I'm married." She smiled and replied, "Does Evelina know about this? About you being here?" This question surprised me. "Of course she knows. She's your friend." Rachel laughed. "Funny, Paul. Very funny." I didn't understand what she meant, quickly gathered my things and drove home. At home I told Evelina about the repair, but didn't mention Rachel's strange behavior. I didn't want to create problems between friends over some misunderstanding. But the real shock was waiting for me later. The following week Rachel called again. She said she needed to set up the TV and install some kind of streaming device. I didn't want to go after the last incident, but Evelina was standing nearby and nodded, "Go help Rachel. She's alone, it's hard for her." I went on Thursday evening after work. Rachel greeted me in a short dress, all made up. The TV indeed needed setting up. I just had to connect the cables and do an auto search for channels. While I was fiddling with the technology, Rachel brought beer and sat next to me on the couch, very close. When I finished, she tried to kiss me again. I stood up abruptly and said, "Rachel, stop. This is unacceptable." She laughed. "Oh, come on, Paul. Don't pretend to be a saint. Evelina knows everything." "Knows what exactly?" I asked. "About us, of course," Rachel replied with a mysterious smile. I didn't continue the conversation and left quickly. At home I was quiet. Evelina asked if everything was okay. I said I was just tired. But the real shock was waiting for me later. On Friday morning Rachel called again. Evelina answered, talked to her for about 5 minutes, then handed the phone to me. "Paul, I have problems with the electricity again. Can you come tonight? Please, it's urgent." I looked at Evelina. She nodded. "Go, Paul. Rachel is very worried." Something in my wife's tone alerted me, but I couldn't figure out what exactly. In the evening I went to Rachel's. This time she opened the door in regular clothes, looking concerned. "The light in the bedroom keeps flickering," she explained. We went to the bedroom. I checked the switch, the bulb, everything was normal. "Maybe the problem is in the wiring," I said. "You need to call an electrician." "Could you look a little more?" Rachel asked. "I'm so worried there might be a fire." I agreed to stay another hour. We returned to the living room. Rachel brought coffee. We talked about various things. She told me about work, about future plans. But the real shock was waiting for me later. Suddenly Rachel asked, "Paul, how long have you and Evelina known about me?" "What do you mean?" "Well, she told you about me even before we met, right?" I didn't understand the question. "Rachel, we met when you first came to our house. 3 months ago." She smiled strangely. "Ah, Paul. You're so naive." At that moment my phone beeped. A message from Evelina. "How are things at Rachel's? Did you fix everything?" I replied, "Not yet, just took a look. Need an electrician." The response came immediately, "Okay, don't stay there too long. Remember, we have plans tomorrow." I said goodbye to Rachel and drove home. Evelina was already asleep. I didn't wake her up. But the real shock was waiting for me later. On Saturday morning, Evelina said she was going to her mother's in Indianapolis for the whole day. She suggested I come with her, but I declined. I wanted to watch football with friends at the bar. Around 2 in the afternoon, Rachel called me. "Paul, sorry to bother you again. My shower is leaking, water is pouring right onto the floor. Can you come?" I don't know what to do. I was at the bar with friends, had a few beers, but decided I needed to help. I told the guys I had an urgent matter and left. Rachel met me in a panic. "Paul, thank God you came. Look what's happening." We went to the bathroom. Indeed, the shower was leaking, water was standing on the floor. I started taking apart the connections to find the problem. "Rachel, pass me a towel," I asked when I realized I needed to replace a gasket. She brought a towel and suddenly said, "Paul, can I tell you something?" "Sure," I replied, continuing to work. "Evelina is a very lucky woman." I looked up. "What?" "She has such a caring husband. Always ready to help, even strangers." Something in her tone alerted me. "Rachel, we're not strangers. You're Evelina's friend." She laughed. "Ah, Paul. Are you really sure about that?" But the real shock was waiting for me later. I stopped working and looked at her. "What do you mean? Haven't you wondered why I always call exactly when Evelina isn't home? Why she always knows when you're at my place? Why she never comes with you to visit me?" My heart started beating faster. "Rachel, what are you trying to say?" She took out her phone and showed me a text conversation. I saw messages from Evelina. "Paul is coming to you at 2:30 p.m. Is everything ready?" And Rachel's response, "Yes, waiting." My hands were shaking as I read other messages. "Tomorrow Paul will be free after 6 p.m. Evelina, he's been very suspicious lately. Don't worry, I control everything." What does this mean? I whispered. Rachel smiled. "What do you think, Paul?" I grabbed the phone and started reading further. The conversation had been going on for several months. There were photos of my car near Rachel's house, screenshots from my phone's GPS tracker, detailed plans for our accidental meetings. But the real shock was waiting for me later. "Is Evelina paying you?" I asked. "Paul, it's not about money. Although your wife is very generous." "Then what?" Rachel came closer. "She wants a divorce, Paul. But not an ordinary one. She wants you to look guilty. She wants everyone to think you were cheating." My legs felt like cotton. "Why?" "The company where she works belongs to her lover. Marcus Wellington, you know him. That rich client she always talked about." I remembered. Evelina indeed often mentioned some Marcus Wellington, the owner of a large restaurant chain who ordered advertising campaigns from her agency. "They've been together for 2 years, Paul. But Marcus doesn't want a scandal. He has his own business reputation. He needs the divorce to look like the problem is with you." I sat on the edge of the bathtub trying to comprehend what I'd heard. "All these repairs." I began. "A performance, Paul. Evelina planned everything. She installed a tracker on your phone, knows all your movements. Every time you came to me she took GPS screenshots, collecting evidence of your affair." But the real shock was waiting for me later. "But why are you telling me this?" I asked. Rachel sighed. "Because I can't do this anymore, Paul. You're a good man. You don't deserve this. Evelina promised me a job at Marcus's company, a new start after the divorce. But this is wrong." I was reaching for my phone to call Evelina, but Rachel stopped me. "Paul, she's in Indianapolis, remember? What if I tell you where she really is?" "Where?" "At a hotel with Marcus. They've been there since morning, celebrating the successful completion of the operation. Evelina thinks you just cheated on her with her best friend." My head was spinning. "Evidence? Jeepers. She was going to file for divorce? On Monday. Already prepared all the documents. But the best part, Paul, is that she was recording our phone conversations. Every single one. She has recordings where you agree to come to your mistress, where we discuss our meetings." But the real shock was waiting for me later. Rachel went to the living room and brought back a voice recorder. "Evelina gave me this. Told me to turn it on every time you came. Listen to the last recording." I pressed the button and heard my voice. "Rachel, sorry to bother you again. It was our conversation half an hour ago when I agreed to come help with the shower. Without context, this sounds like..." I began. "Like a conversation with a mistress, yes. Evelina is a smart woman, Paul." I sat in shock, trying to understand the scale of deception. My wife, whom I had trusted for 7 years, had been planning to destroy my life for 2 years. What should I do? I asked. Rachel thought, I have an idea. But you might not like it. Tell me. Evelina comes home at 8 in the evening. She expects to find you depressed or panicked about what happened between us. She's going to console you and tomorrow, hit you with divorce papers. And what do you suggest? Let's play her game but our way. But the real shock was waiting for me later. Rachel explained the plan. We had to stage that something really happened between us, but record everything on camera with her explanations. Create our own evidence that this was a trap. Paul, I have correspondence with Evelina, audio recordings of all instructions, even receipts for payment for services. She documented everything except her own role in this performance. We spent the next 3 hours recording Rachel's video confession, collecting all evidence of the conspiracy. She showed me bank transfers from Evelina, detailed instructions for each emergency situation, even a plan of hidden camera locations in her house. Evelina wanted to record every one of our meetings, Paul. Here's a camera in the chandelier, here behind the painting. She was going to edit a film about your betrayal. At 7 in the evening I drove home. Evelina returned exactly at 8 as planned. Honey, how are things at Rachel's? She asked, kissing my cheek. Everything's fine, fixed the shower, I replied, trying to speak in a normal tone. But the real shock was waiting for me later. Evelina was extraordinarily affectionate all evening. She cooked my favorite dinner, asked about work, told me about the trip to her mother's. The perfect wife. Before bed she hugged me and said, Paul, I love you so much. You know you can trust me with everything, right? I looked into her eyes and saw absolutely sincere care. An outstanding actress. On Sunday morning Evelina announced she was going shopping with friends. Rachel is going with us too, she added. Want to join? I declined. When she left I called Rachel. Evelina said you're going shopping with her. Paul, she didn't even invite me. We agreed not to communicate until tomorrow. She doesn't want anyone to see us together before filing the documents. So Evelina went to Marcus. I decided to check. I drove to downtown to the Grand Plaza Hotel where, according to Rachel, they met. I saw Evelina's car in the parking lot. But the real shock was waiting for me later. On Monday morning Evelina was acting strangely nervous. She checked her phone several times, typed something, made calls. She said she would be late today, important negotiations with a client. At 2 in the afternoon a lawyer called me. Mr. Johnson, your wife has filed for divorce. There are allegations of adultery. You need to come urgently. I came to the lawyer with a folder of evidence that Rachel and I had collected. I showed the video confession, bank transfers, correspondence, audio recordings. Mr. Johnson, this is a serious matter. Your wife didn't just cheat, she organized a criminal conspiracy to falsify evidence. This could have criminal consequences. In the evening Evelina came home with a triumphant look. Paul, we need to talk, she said, sitting across from me. I know about your relationship with Rachel. I remained silent. I have evidence, Paul. Photos, recordings of phone conversations, GPS tracks. You constantly went to her. Evelina? Don't deny it. I know everything. Rachel told me everything. But the real shock was waiting for me later. What exactly did she tell you? I asked. About your meetings. About how you pursued her. How you convinced her that you don't love me. I took out my phone and played Rachel's last video. My name is Rachel Morrison. I'm giving this statement voluntarily. For 3 months I, on the orders of Evelina Johnson, deceived her husband Paul Johnson, creating false evidence of his infidelity. Evelina's face first expressed surprise, then horror, then rage. That bitch betrayed me, she screamed. Just like you betrayed me, Evelina. She tried to deny, justify herself, even threaten. But the evidence was irrefutable. The next day I filed a countersuit for divorce demanding compensation for moral damages. I also turned over all materials to the police. Evelina lost her job when the scandal became known. Marcus Wellington broke up with her. He didn't need reputation problems. But the real shock was waiting for me later. It turned out Rachel wasn't the only one. During the investigation, it was revealed that Evelina had been preparing Plan B for a year, another divorce option. She had hired a private detective who was gathering compromising material on me, had copies of all my passwords, even planned to plant drugs in my car. Rachel was just the last attempt. The simplest and cheapest. During the deeper investigation, we discovered Evelina had been planning this for much longer than 2 years. The police found evidence that she had been researching divorce laws, studying cases of adultery, even consulting with other women who had successfully divorced their husbands using similar schemes. There were notebooks with detailed plans, timelines, contingency scenarios. She had calculated the potential alimony, property division, even my possible reactions to different situations. It was like looking at the work of a criminal mastermind. But the real shock was waiting for me later. The investigation revealed that Evelina had been manipulating our entire social circle. She had told our mutual friends that I was becoming distant and suspicious, preparing them for the eventual revelation of my supposed infidelity. She had even arranged for some of our friends to accidentally see me going to Rachel's house. Our neighbor Mrs. Henderson came forward as a witness. She told the police that Evelina had asked her to keep an eye on when I left the house and when I returned. Evelina had told her she was worried I might be having an affair and wanted to protect our marriage. The bank records showed that Evelina had been systematically moving money from our joint accounts into a private account for over a year. She had been preparing financially for the divorce, ensuring she would have resources while painting me as the guilty party who deserved nothing. But the real shock was waiting for me later. During the trial, more details emerged. Evelina's lawyer tried to argue that she was the victim of an elaborate frame-up orchestrated by Rachel and me. But Rachel's testimony was devastating. Mrs. Johnson contacted me through a dating app, Rachel testified. She said she was looking for someone to help her with a special project. She offered me $10,000 to seduce her husband and create evidence of an affair. The court heard recordings of Evelina coaching Rachel on what to say, how to act, even what to wear. There were detailed scripts for their phone conversations, instructions on how to make the situation seem urgent and innocent. She told me exactly when to call, what problems to have, even which repair issues would seem most believable to a mechanic, Rachel continued. She said Paul was the type of man who couldn't refuse to help a woman in distress. But the real shock was waiting for me later. The prosecution revealed that this wasn't Evelina's first attempt at orchestrating a divorce. They had found evidence that she had tried similar schemes with Marcus Wellington's previous relationships. She had helped him end his first marriage by creating compromising situations with his wife. Marcus, desperate to distance himself from the scandal, cooperated fully with the investigation. He revealed that Evelina had been obsessed with the idea of a perfect divorce, one that would leave her blameless and wealthy while destroying her husband's reputation. She studied high-profile divorce cases like they were textbooks, Marcus testified. She was fascinated by women who had successfully destroyed their husbands' lives and gotten away with everything. She saw it as an art form. The court also heard that Evelina had been documenting my daily routines, my friends, my habits, even my favorite foods and TV shows. She had created a psychological profile of me to predict my reactions and manipulate my responses. But the real shock was waiting for me later. During the divorce proceedings, I learned that Evelina had been telling Marcus that I was abusive and controlling. She had created fake text messages and staged photos to make it appear that I was threatening her. Marcus had been led to believe that he was rescuing her from a dangerous situation. When Marcus realized the extent of Evelina's deception, he was horrified. "I thought I was helping a woman escape from an abusive marriage," he told the court. "I never imagined she was the one orchestrating everything. She's a master manipulator." The financial investigation revealed that Evelina had been planning to claim that I had been hiding assets and income. She had prepared fake documents showing mysterious cash deposits and secret accounts that didn't exist. Her goal was to convince the court that I was wealthier than I appeared and deserved to pay substantial alimony. But the real shock was waiting for me later. As the case progressed, more victims came forward. 3 other women testified that Evelina had approached them with similar projects. She had been running a side business helping unhappy wives create evidence of their husband's infidelity. She called it liberation services, one woman testified. She said she was helping women escape from marriages where they weren't appreciated. She had a whole system: fake friends, staged scenarios, manufactured evidence. She guaranteed results. The investigation revealed that Evelina had made over $50,000 in the past 2 years helping other women frame their husbands. She had developed different packages depending on the client's needs and budget. Rachel broke down during her testimony, revealing that she had initially been reluctant but was desperate for money after her real divorce left her in financial ruin. "She convinced me that Paul would be better off without her anyway," Rachel sobbed. She said he deserved someone who would really love him, and that I was doing him a favor by exposing his wife's true nature. But the real shock was waiting for me later. The trial lasted 8 months. During this time, I learned details about my marriage that made me question everything I thought I knew about the woman I had loved. Evelina had been keeping detailed diaries about our relationship, analyzing my weaknesses and planning how to exploit them. She had written entries like, "Paul is too trusting. He believes the best in everyone. This will be his downfall." And, "Paul's mechanic nature makes him want to fix everything. I can use this against him by creating problems that only he can solve." The diaries revealed that Evelina had never truly loved me. Our entire marriage had been a calculation for her. She had seen me as a stable provider while she pursued her real interests and relationships. "Paul is predictable," one entry read. "He works hard, pays the bills and asks for nothing in return. Perfect husband material until I find something better. Marcus is that something better, but I need to extract maximum value from the Paul situation first." But the real shock was waiting for me later. During the final weeks of the trial, Evelina's defense team tried a desperate strategy. They claimed that she was suffering from a psychological disorder that made her unable to distinguish between reality and fantasy. They brought in psychiatrists who testified that she was a victim of her own delusions. But the prosecution's evidence was too overwhelming. The systematic nature of her deceptions, the business she had built around destroying marriages, the careful financial planning, everything pointed to a calculating criminal mind, not a delusional one. The judge was particularly harsh in his final ruling. "Mrs. Johnson, you have shown a level of premeditation and callousness that is truly shocking. You didn't just betray your husband's trust, you built an entire criminal enterprise around the destruction of marriages and families." Evelina was sentenced to 3 years in prison for fraud, conspiracy, and extortion. She was also ordered to pay restitution to me and to the other victims of her schemes. But the real shock was waiting for me later. After the trial, I tried to rebuild my life. I moved to a different state, changed my name legally, and started over in a new city. But the damage to my ability to trust ran deeper than I had initially realized. I went through months of therapy trying to understand how I could have been so completely deceived. My therapist helped me realize that Evelina's manipulation had been so sophisticated that even trained professionals might have fallen for it. "She studied you like a scientist studies a lab rat," my therapist explained. "She learned exactly which buttons to push and when to push them. This wasn't your failure to see the signs, this was a masterclass in psychological manipulation." Rachel and I stayed in contact during the trial, but afterward, we both agreed it was best to go our separate ways. The experience had bonded us in a strange way, but also reminded us both of the worst period of our lives. But the real shock was waiting for me later. 2 years after the trial, I received a letter in prison mail forwarded from my old address. It was from Evelina. In it, she expressed no remorse for what she had done. Instead, she blamed me for ruining her life, by exposing her. "You could have just accepted the divorce quietly," she wrote. "We both could have moved on with our lives. But you had to be vindictive and destroy everything. Now Marcus won't even visit me in prison and my business is ruined. I hope you're happy." The letter confirmed what I had suspected, that Evelina still didn't understand the magnitude of what she had done. In her mind, she was the victim of circumstances, not the architect of a cruel and elaborate deception. I never wrote back. Some people are so fundamentally broken that they can't be fixed or reasoned with. Evelina was one of those people. But the real shock was waiting for me later. 3 years after the trial, I was contacted by a documentary filmmaker who wanted to tell my story. At first, I was reluctant, but I eventually agreed, hoping that sharing my experience might help other people recognize the signs of such elaborate deceptions. During the filming, I learned that my case had become something of a landmark in divorce law. Lawyers were using Evelina's methods as examples of what to look for in suspected fraud cases. Law schools were teaching courses that included my story as a case study. The documentary, titled The Perfect Betrayal, premiered at several film festivals and was eventually picked up by a streaming service. It was strange to see my life played out on screen, but I felt a sense of closure knowing that my nightmare might help prevent others from experiencing the same thing. But the real shock was waiting for me later. 5 years after the trial, I met someone new. Sarah was a veterinarian who had also been through a difficult divorce, though nothing as extreme as what I had experienced. We met at a support group for people who had survived abusive relationships. Sarah knew my story from the documentary, but she didn't treat me like a victim or a curiosity. She understood the long-term effects of psychological manipulation and was patient with my trust issues. It took me 2 years to feel comfortable enough to move in with Sarah, and another year before I could even consider the idea of marriage again. But with her help and continued therapy, I slowly learned to trust again. The relationship with Sarah taught me the difference between real love and manipulation. Real love doesn't require elaborate schemes or psychological games. It doesn't involve constant testing or manipulation of emotions. Real love is simple, honest, and straightforward. But the real shock was waiting for me later. 6 years after the trial, I received news that Evelina had been arrested again. After her release from prison, she had moved to another state and started a new version of her liberation services business. This time, she was targeting wealthy older men, convincing younger women to marry them and then orchestrate divorces that would leave the women with substantial alimony. The FBI had been tracking her activities for months before they moved in to arrest her. They found evidence that she had successfully executed her scheme at least 4 times, resulting in older men being defrauded of millions of dollars. This time, Evelina was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The judge noted that she had shown no capacity for rehabilitation and posed a continued danger to society. I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness when I heard the news. Satisfaction that she could no longer hurt innocent people, but sadness that someone could be so fundamentally damaged that they couldn't stop destroying lives. But the real shock was waiting for me later. Now, 10 years after that Saturday afternoon when my world fell apart, I can look back and see how much I've grown. Sarah and I married 3 years ago and we have a daughter together. I've learned to trust again, but I'm also more aware of the red flags that I missed with Evelina. Sometimes people ask me if I regret not seeing the signs earlier, or if I wish I had handled things differently. The answer is no. I did the best I could with the information I had at the time. Evelina was a master manipulator who had fooled everyone, not just me. The experience taught me that evil can wear a beautiful face and speak with a loving voice. It can share your bed and know your deepest secrets while plotting your destruction. But it also taught me that truth has a way of surfacing, even when it's buried under layers of deception. I still work as a mechanic, though now I own my own shop. I still help people with their problems, though I'm more careful about the situations I involve myself in. I still believe in the good in people, but I'm no longer naive about the potential for evil. Rachel moved to Australia after the trial and started a new life there. We exchanged Christmas cards, but we've never seen each other again. We were both victims of Evelina's schemes, but our shared trauma isn't the foundation for a healthy relationship. Marcus Wellington lost his business empire in the scandal and now manages a small restaurant in Florida. He reached out to me once to apologize and I accepted his apology. He was as much a victim of Evelina's manipulation as I was. But the real shock was waiting for me later. The final shock came just last month. I received a call from the FBI informing me that Evelina had died in prison. She had been found in her cell, apparently having suffered a heart attack. She was only 42 years old. I felt nothing when I heard the news. No satisfaction, no sadness, no closure. Just emptiness. The woman who had consumed so much of my mental energy for so many years was gone, but the damage she had done would last forever. At her funeral, which I did not attend, only 3 people were present: her mother, her sister, and Marcus Wellington. Even in death, Evelina was surrounded by the wreckage of broken relationships and destroyed trust. I think about her sometimes, wondering what made her the way she was. What events in her childhood or early life had twisted her into someone capable of such calculated cruelty? I'll never know, and it doesn't really matter now. What matters is that I survived. I found love again. I learned to trust again. I built a new life on the ashes of the old one, and that new life is infinitely better than what I had before. The GPS may not lie, but people do. Constantly. The key is learning to distinguish between the lies that come from human weakness and fear, and the lies that come from a place of calculated malice. The first kind can be forgiven and overcome. The second kind can destroy you if you let it. I chose not to let it destroy me. And that, perhaps, is the most important lesson of all. Thank you for watching the video to the end. Maybe YouTube will no longer offer you my channel, so subscribe to it by clicking subscribe on the right under the video to receive new interesting stories. Also on the right of the video there is a playlist with other interesting stories that you can listen to, and you can also write in the comments what stories you would like to see on the channel.